Okay, another overview video of some of the new additions that were added to the VCV Rack library lately. We start with another beautiful module from Flag. It's called Thorns. It's a multi-band distortion. Here basically I have a sine wave going to it, and you can see here on the scope how it will look like. We still have a sine wave, but I start to take the drive up and you can see how the wave shape is changing. Maybe I can go a bit closer. And we have also the tone control that will change where the split of the frequencies will be, there, where the separation will be, and which frequencies will be more or less saturated, which is quite interesting. It adds lots of movement to any sound. So here I have a small example ready. I have here the modulo sequencer sequencing psych. Let's already unmute this. I have psych going to tangents, and of course a VCA and an envelope controlling this VCA. From there it's going to Thorns, as you can see here, and I have sample and hold modulating the drive. So this adds lots of dynamics to the sound. This is going to Chronoblob 2. And I have Chronoblob, maybe I can zoom in a bit. I have Chronoblob set to a mono delay, which means that I have here send and return feedback loop. So I'm sending the delayed signal into font, a low pass filter in this case, and back into the delay. So only the delayed signal is going through this filter and it gets really nice movement. Let's listen to this for a second. Okay, the next voice, oh, this is a nice one. So we have here a sine wave. Again, I'm sending a sine wave like we see before to Thorns. And in this case, I'm modulating the tone. So this creates this really wobbly type sound. And again, it's just a sine wave, but it has lots of movement to it thanks to this tone modulation. This is going to another module from Flag, the tap dancer multi-tap delay. But I also have it going first to a VCA. You can see the VCA is closed. And I have here ref tone from Bog Audio controlling the pitch. So in this case, it's a C5 note. And I'm using the macro module from Stormeder to control multiple parameters with one knob. So I'm controlling the drive amount and the VCA. So while the VCA is opening, also the drive amount will go up. You will see this in a second. And then we'll get this wobbly, warbly sine wave full of character. Super nice. Okay, the next voice I have here going to through Thorns is drums. I have here some drums. I have the gate sequencer sequencing deep from Hora, a bass drum, hi-hat from Hora, and the snare from Proc. I'm mixing them in the VCV mixer, and this is going to Thorns. Also here I'm using sample and hold to modulate the drive amount. And I have also the snare. A copy of the snare is going to a VCA, which is being opened, as you can see now with the clock, and it's going through Chronoblob 2, so we get something nice and not glitchy, but with movement. So let's listen to the whole patch for a second. Okay, the next module is the 4FO from Bog Audio. It's the little brother or sister of the 8FO. Basically, we have an LFO with multiple wave shapes. Also added in this version is the sample and hold, which is quite cool. And we have 4 outputs. Each one has a different phase. As you can see here on the scope, we have the blue trace and the pink trace. They start at different times, and we can also change this and modulate the phase and create really interesting waves and shapes and results. We also have sample rate reduction. And if we go to a square wave or pulse wave, we have also pulse width. And of course, this we can also modulate. We can offset this also if you want unipolar or bipolar scale already from the module itself. And if we go, for example, to sample and hold, we can also add slew to it and get something a bit more smooth, random modulation. And again, we have 4 phases. So basically 4 signals we can use and modulate and create all sorts of crazy things. So here again, I have an example. First of all, I have here a few voices, identical voices. I have Blick from Volt, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Each is receiving a different note. Here I have the note G, D, another G, an octave up, and B flat. And I'm mixing them with a mixer from Nischi. Now what I have here, I have one 4FO modulating their pulse width, as you can see here, and also their wave. So it's basically changing the timbre of this of those oscillators, but it's also modulating the levels here on the mixer. You can see that everything is moving. But I get an interesting wave shape by using another 4FO, as you can see here, and I'm modulating the phases of this LFO. So basically we get something that is always changing and always moving, and this is how it will sound like. It's a sort of a drone. Now what I'm doing here, I'm sending it from the mixer, I'm sending it to the stereo filter from Squinky Labs Stairway, and I'm mixing 4 waves of the 4FO. I'm mixing them with the VCV mixer, and you can see the result here on the scope, and this is modulating the cutoff point of the filter, so we get also movement there. So this is the first voice, a sort of a drone. The second voice is Basil that I have here, and this is also quite interesting and always unpredictable. So I have here 4FO, and I'm feedback modulating it or feedback patching it. So I have different phases modulating the phases of the other phases. And we get this interesting wave shape, as you can see here, and it creates a really nice rhythm. So what I have here, I have Basil going to Vacumba for some crunch, and the VCA. Again, I have ref tone just sending one note. In this case, it's a G. But this waveform, this signal we get from this feedback modulated 4FO is creating this nice rhythm with the VCA. So we get this. Really interesting. And then what I have here, I'm using this, you can see here I'm using it, this one, the output I'm using to drive a clock divider. Even though it's a sine wave, still it can drive different modules. And so I'm using it to drive a clock divider, and I'm using the divided by 2 clock to trigger a bass drum. Again, I'm using deep from Hora. And this bass drum is going once directly to the mixer. It's moving together with this rhythm because I'm using this rhythm to drive the clock divider. Now I'm also sending this this kick drum to plateau, 100% wet, so no drive signal. From plateau it goes to debriatus again for some extra crunch and punch, which adds even more crunch but also acts as a VCA. And I'm sidechaining this reverb with the kick drum. And before I show you this macro controller I have here, I have another copy of the kick drum of Deep going to Lala, which will split the frequencies to high frequencies and low frequencies. I have it set to 250 Hz, so now I'm using everything that's above 250 Hz and I'm sending it to Chronoblob 2, so only the high frequencies will go there. And I have here a microcontroller that controls the drive and envelope for the drive of Deep, so I can control the timbre with one knob and do something like this. And another voice I have here, I'm using the 4FO as a voice. You can use it as a voice. It even has a volt per octave input, so it will also track 1 volt per octave. I'm feedback modulating its phase again. You can see it here. And it's going through a delay, and I have a microcontroller again controlling this modulation, the amount of modulation, opening the VCA, and it's also bringing the wet down of the chronoblob. So when the voice comes in, the wet is going down, and when the voice goes out, the wet or the delayed signal will come back in. So as long as the voice is playing, we will not hear the delay. When it's not playing, we will hear it. And I can play also with the sample rate here just to add more character to the sound. This is this voice, and what I have here, I have another 4FO, again feedback modulated, and this is modulating the panning of this voice. So this is quite a nice patch. Let's listen to this for a bit. The next module is Polygene, the polyphonic version of Eugene, the Euclidean sequencer. We have 16 channels we can use. You can see these red points or strips are moving. We can change the length for each of the channels. Again, it's polyphonic, the hits. We can even randomize each of the channels and create really interesting results polyphonically. So you can use only, if you want, you can use only one module for different voices, or use one module for a polyphonic voice. We have also here all the other features like end of cycle, invert, reverse, and so on. Really interesting and fun module. So here I have again an example. First of all, I have Polygene. And something interesting you can try, I didn't do it here, but you can try, you can feed different clocks into the clock input. So what I'm doing here, I have a clock going to the polymult. So I'm multing this monophonic clock into the 16 channels, or in this case, I'm using just 4 channels. But you can use 4 different clocks and also different resets. So you can reset the different channels at different times and create really interesting polyphonic, crazy, polymetric, I want to say, polymetric sequences. So what I have here, I have a Polygene going to split. So I'm splitting this polyphonic signal. And first of all, it's triggering Deep again from Hora, going through some delay. And I have micromap from Stürmelder mapped to modulate the drive and the low pass filter with sample and hold. So this is the first voice. I have here also hi-hat. Again, being triggered from Polygene, I'm splitting it. The first channel is going to deep, the second is going to the closed hat, the third is going to the open hat. The next voice is a bass, which is again being triggered by Polygene. I have here the percussive vibration going through the electric ensemble from Flag chorus. And I'm sidechaining it, as you can see here, with the kick that will come now from knock, from Volt. And another interesting thing you can do, there is the polyphonic end of cycle output. So what I'm doing here, I'm merging this polyphonic end of cycle output with the polyphonic logic from Count Modular. So it will take multiple signals, a polyphonic signal, and will merge it with logic, in this case an OR logic. So never mind which one is playing, we will get a trigger out of the OR output. Basically, I'm mixing or merging or combining those triggers. This is triggering a really short envelope that is opening a VCA for white noise through a bandpass filter. You already know what's about to come, carpless strong frogs. This is going to a delay, a short delay with high feedback, or actually I'm modulating the delay times and feedback with sample and hold. So the results differ. And what I have here micro map mapped to the reverb. I can show you this, to the send reverb of this channel. This is how it will sound like. Couple of strong frogs. And now what I'm doing here, this voice actually goes first through the VCV mixer, because I have here a feedback loop. So this will go, the mixer will go to the main mixer, but it will also go to a bandpass filter and a tap dancer from Flag again, and it will go back to the mixer. So basically we have here a feedback loop that will happen when I start taking the drive up. And you hear the results. Feedback loops are fun. So again, the Polygene from, I think it's Rare Breeds. So the next module is called Horse Doodle Do. And it's basically a polyphonic sequencer from computer scale. We can change the patterns. We have also different spread. You will see this in a second. We can change the length, the number of polyphonic channels. We can change the density also of the sequence, the density spread. Of course, everything is with CV. There are also different modes here. Each channel outputs independent pulse and CV sequence. All channels triggered by channel 1, and each channel is triggered by the previous channel's trigger sequence. So you can experiment with different modes. Let's have a look at an example I have here. So the first one I have here is Horse Doodle Do, sequencing polyphonically terraform. And you can see if I stand here with the mouse, you can see exactly the patterns with the smileys, which is quite fun and helpful, of course. So you can see the patterns, how they change. If I change the density, for example, you can see that now they are more dense. Let's bring it back a bit so it's not so dense. So you can create really interesting different sections of your patch, of your composition. So this is sequencing terraform. I also have it running polyphonically the ADDR sequencer which is controlling the velocity of the gates, of the triggers, because Terraform can work with this, and then we get velocity changes through the levels, as you can see here, of the VCA. This is going to some delay. It sounds like this. And again, I can change the density and the length, maybe just 7 steps. So this is the first voice. The second voice, what I'm doing here, again, I'm using the polyphonic logic from Count Modular. And again, I'm using the end of cycle, the polyphonic end of cycle with this logic module. In this case, I'm using the XOR, so whenever one or the other, but not when a few sequences happening at the same time, or the end of cycle triggers are happening at the same time, only when one or the other. This is triggering plats in chords mode, going through some delay. Again, I have here font in the feedback loop. It will sound like this. Quite nice. Here I have the percussive vibration. So what I'm doing here, I'm using the same sequence, the CV output, and I'm splitting it because it's polyphonic. I'm splitting it. First of all, I'm using another logic, in this case an OR logic, to trigger the bass. But what I'm doing here, I'm sending 2 channels to the logic section, to the analog logic section of kinks, of utilities. And I'm using the minimum output, so the minimum values of both of those sequences as the new sequence for the bass, which is sidechained with a kick drum that we will hear also later on. This is the bass now. Another sequence for the percussive vibration. The next voice is a sort of a pad. I have here another horse, a doodle do. And again, it's sequencing polyphonically, in this case pellet, which is an enhanced version of plats. This is going to plateau and the VCA, because also this voice I'm sidechaining with the kick drum, so it will sound like this. And let's add this nice kick drum. So this was Horse a Doodle Do from Computer Scare. The last module for today is still not in the library, but it's on its way. It's the 8-SEC from JW. It's an 8-step sequencer with interesting features, and it's a great sequencer for beginners, and I will show you also why. We have 8 steps, we have gates and pitch. We also have end of cycle, so we can chain a few sequences, we can trigger all sorts of events, and we will see also soon enough an example. We also have a probability per step. I will come back to this shortly. And why it's so great for beginners? First of all, because it's easy to understand, and also it has a built-in quantizer with range settings and everything built in, so you don't have to deal with too many modules beside this sequencer. And again, we have the probability feature. So first of all, we can add probability per step, but we have this probability CV output. You can see this on the scope. If I change the probability settings, we get basically the CV, the sequence for the probability that we can use for modulation. We can use as another sequence. You can see it here on the scope. And if you want to use this CV output, but you don't want to affect the probability of the gates, you can decouple it with this button here, with this it's not a slider, it's a button, it's a switch. With this switch here, you can decouple the gates from the probability. So again, interesting features. Let's have a look at an example I have here. I have here a basic sequence, an 8-step sequence without any probability or anything, sequencing the percussive vibration, going through some delay, and I have sample and hold modulating the decay and the timbre through the FM input. It will sound like this. So again, just a simple 8-step sequence, but it's working great if you need an 8-step sequence. It has built-in range, octaves, quantizer, really easy to use. The next voice I have here, I have interzone from Valley. It's a sort of a bass, I guess. And I have again 8 steps, but I'm using the end of cycle. I'm sending it through chances from count modular just to add more probability to the end of cycle. And this is triggering the randomization of the notes. So every now and then we get a new set of notes. I have interzone going through the electric ensemble from flag, which is a chorus, and I'm sending also the high frequencies through a delay. And I'm using here micromap from Stormelder with sample and hold to modulate the release time. As you can see it here, it's moving. So this will sound as follows. And I can do something like this. So again, an 8-step sequence, but in this case, every now and then we will get a new set of notes thanks to the end of cycle output, triggering the randomization of the notes. Okay, here I have another voice. In this case, what I did, I just randomized the notes and the probability, and I saved a few presets, a few scenes, a few snapshots with 8-phase. So 8-phase is working really nicely with this sequencer. It's working nicely with any sequencer, but especially with this one because it has only 8 steps. So you can create and chain and build longer sequences by saving snapshots, and it's really easy to get interesting results here thanks to the randomization features. So the voice itself is an FM voice with 2 FM operators. I'm sending them first through a VCA because I don't want them to play all the time. I have the VCA opened with an envelope that is being triggered by a divided by 16th note or clock, sorry, and this is going through some delay. So we have another layer, another sequence, again saved with 8-phase. So we get 4 different sequences basically. Okay, and this sequencer is also great for drums. So here I'm using Tremor 2 and I have a snare also. The snare is actually being triggered by a divided clock, but I have the kick and the noise section, the oscillator and the noise section sequenced by the 8-sec. So what I'm doing, I'm using the gate to trigger both of them. And I have the range of the volt per octave output of this pitch information all the way up, so I can use it for modulation. Why not? It's still control voltage. So I have the pitch output modulating the decay time of the oscillator section of the kick. And I have the probability CV output. As we've seen before, we can use it also modulating. This is actually modulating the kick, and the pitch is modulating the decay of the noise. So basically we get a kick and a sort of hi-hats. And I have the snare here triggered by a clock division going through some delay for extra glitchiness. So the 8-sec is also great for drums and modulation. And again, I can do this with interzone. And we have probability for the drums. We have all sorts of sequences here. It's a really fun sequencer. Again, great for beginners if you're a beginner to VCV or to modular. This sequencer is something you can easily use. Okay, and that was it. I hope you enjoyed this video. Cheers.